I'm Lana Brooks, 29 and last month. My own mother tried to take everything my grandfather left me, calling it a family correction. She didn't just want the money. She wanted to erase me from his legacy. I was 29 when my grandfather passed away and left me everything. Not just the house, the stores, the investments, but his legacy, his name, and, unknowingly, a storm I had no idea how to weather. The day after his funeral, my mother, Marilyn, sent a message: family meeting, tomorrow at 3, come home. That was it. No greeting, no warmth. Just an order like she always gave when she wanted control without confrontation. And so, at 3 o'clock sharp, I stood in front of the house I grew up in. It used to smell like cinnamon toast and oil from the garage where Grandpa tinkered with old tools. Now, it looks sterile, like a showroom for a life I no longer belonged to. I rang the bell, but the door swung open before I could touch it. Right on time, my mother said, her smile tight and glossy. I stepped into the living room and instantly felt like I was on trial. Seated around me were my stepfather Louis, my older sister Vanessa, my younger brother Drew, and 2 men in sharp suits who didn't bother hiding their briefcases. I knew immediately this wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. They were all there, arranged like a jury. And I was the defendant. I took the only empty chair directly across from my mother. She studied me like I was an interloper in her kingdom. It hit me then I wasn't here as family. I was here as a threat. The room pulsed with silence as I looked around. Not one of them met my eyes. They called it a discussion about fairness. But I knew what this was: the fallout of inheritance gone wrong, because I got it and they didn't. I remembered how, as a child, I was always the afterthought, the quiet one, the awkward one. The one who didn't demand new things or throw tantrums over canceled vacations. I didn't charm, I didn't impress. I just watched them spend, fight, manipulate. I saw my mother rewrite stories of generosity into stories of entitlement. But Grandpa saw me. While they dismissed me, he pulled me into the quiet of his home office and taught me things: how to read balance sheets, how to listen more than speak, and most of all, how to protect what matters. I could still hear his voice in my mind that last afternoon at the hospital. Lana, the truth always offends those who profit from lies. They'll come for you. Stand firm, that's all I ask. He knew this day would come. He knew them better than I did. And now, with the smell of fresh coffee no one offered me filling the room, and the eyes of my own blood watching me like a thief, I realized he hadn't just given me an inheritance. He'd given me a battle, and I intended to win it. I left that living room with my spine straight and my hands trembling. They saw me as a girl who got lucky, but they had no idea what it took to earn my grandfather's trust. He didn't leave me his legacy out of favoritism. He did it because he knew I wouldn't waste it. He had trained me for years, in plain sight, while the rest of them weren't paying attention. It started when I was 13. Most Saturdays, while my friends were sleeping in or hanging out at the mall, I was sitting in the back office of Brooks Hardware, cross-legged on a folding chair, squinting at inventory spreadsheets. Grandpa always brought 2 cups of cocoa, one for him, one for me. We'd sit in comfortable silence, then dive into numbers like we were solving mysteries. That was our thing. "You've got sharp eyes," he told me once, after I pointed out a supplier had overcharged us by $300. "You don't just look, you see. That's rare." He never said it to flatter me. Grandpa didn't waste praise. If he said something, he meant it, and I drank it in like water in a desert, because at home, nothing I did ever seemed enough. At home, my mother ruled by image. We weren't a wealthy family by any stretch. But you wouldn't have known that looking at Marilyn. Her nails were always done, her handbags always new, and our house was full of things no one truly needed. I learned early that appearances were everything to her, and I didn't fit her mold. She called me practical in public, but behind closed doors, it was boring, plain, or worse, ungrateful. She married Louis when I was 9, and from then on, the house became a carousel of debt. Louis never said no to her, never questioned a thing. They refinanced the house twice before I finished high school. Meanwhile, my mother racked up credit card balances the way some people collect postcards chasing joy she never seemed to catch. But Grandpa noticed me. Every Saturday at the store, he let me sit beside him during meetings, I watched him talk to suppliers, negotiate delivery times, even calm down angry customers without ever raising his voice. He showed me that leadership wasn't about authority, it was about steadiness, clarity, and treating people like they mattered. When I turned 17, he gave me my first real responsibility managing end-of-month inventory for one of the smaller branches. I remember staying up until 2 a.m. with a calculator and a pile of receipts, terrified of making a mistake. When I handed in the report, he reviewed it silently, then nodded. Accurate to the penny. He said, "I'm proud of you, Lana." No one had ever said that to me before. College came next. I wanted to major in business administration. Grandpa supported me completely. He even offered to pay my tuition in full. I was stunned. But then, without warning, the offer disappeared. My mother intercepted it. She convinced Grandpa that the family needed the money more urgently. Drew's asthma was getting worse. She said, Vanessa needed a special tutor. Louis had medical bills. Grandpa reluctantly agreed to redirect the funds at least. That's what he told me when I asked. I nodded and said I understood. Then I applied for student loans and took a job shelving books at a secondhand bookstore. I never asked Grandpa again. He started visiting the shop once a week, pretending to browse. He'd linger in the business section, slip an envelope between the pages of a book I'd just shelved, and whisper, "Don't tell your mother." Inside were 20s and 50s, folded neatly, always accompanied by a small note in his handwriting. For coffee and courage. For doing hard things. For staying true. When he got sick, heart failure, diagnosed too late, he stopped pretending. We spent hours in the hospital talking, mostly about life, but also about what he'd seen happen in our family. "I gave your mother too much too soon," he said once, gripping my hand. I wanted her to feel secure, but all I did was feed the fire. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. She never learned the difference between need and want. He continued, "But you did. You learned it the hard way. You see the long game. That's why I trust you." I cried that night, not because he was dying, but because someone finally saw the version of me I fought to become. When he passed, the grief swallowed me whole. The world felt unrecognizable. The funeral was a blur of polite condolences and carefully curated tears. My mother arrived in head-to-toe designer black, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, flanked by Louis and my siblings like royalty in mourning. 2 weeks later, I sat in the paneled office of Mr. Claiborne, Grandpa's lawyer. As he read the will aloud, I expected something modest, maybe a little money, maybe one of his old watches. I wasn't prepared for this. To my granddaughter, Lana Brooks, the lawyer read, "I leave the remainder of my estate, including all business holdings, investment portfolios, real estate, and personal effects." Silence. Even the air seemed to pause. My mother dropped her sunglasses to the floor. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "Read it again." But there was no mistake. The man who'd taught me how to balance a ledger had handed me the weight of his entire legacy, and as the fury erupted around me, I sat frozen in my chair, equal parts stunned and honored. That moment was not about fortune. It was about faith. He believed in me. And now, I would have to prove him right. The ink on the will had barely dried before the second ambush arrived, this time wrapped in a silk napkin and a fake smile. If the reading of the will had left my family in stunned disbelief, their next move showed just how far they were willing to go to reclaim what they thought should have been theirs. It started with an invitation. "Family dinner," my mother texted one afternoon. "Just us. Let's talk about how we move forward." Grandpa would want unity. The message was too polished, too diplomatic to be genuine. But I agreed to go. Partly out of curiosity, and partly because I knew this conversation was inevitable. I needed to face it. On my terms. When I arrived at the house, the one they still referred to as the family home, though it legally belonged to me now, I was greeted with warm lighting, jazz music, and a table set for 7, a bottle of wine already breathing, steaks sizzling. The illusion of peace was so complete it almost fooled me. Almost. Seated at the table were 2 men I didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-groomed, in tailored suits. They weren't relatives, that much was clear. They were advisors, my mother explained, helping us understand the estate better. I didn't sit down. Why am I here, I asked. My mother's tone was syrupy sweet. Because this situation is bigger than just you. Lana, we need to make decisions as a family. One of the men, the balder of the two, leaned forward with a practiced smile. Managing an estate of this size is complicated and emotional. It's understandable if you're feeling overwhelmed. I'm not, I replied flatly. You're very young, the second man said, with respect. Few people your age are prepared to handle this responsibility. I folded my arms. I've been handling responsibilities since I was 16. What are you proposing? The bald one cleared his throat and opened a leather folder. We've drawn up a voluntary redistribution. You'd retain a generous 20% of the estate, while transferring the remainder to your mother as the family matriarch. She has more experience with these matters. And the real estate, I asked. Liquidated. The proceeds divided among family members. Equitably. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning I give everything away and get a consolation prize. My mother's voice was sharper now. Lana, we're offering you a fair solution. No one wants a messy legal battle. Neither do I said, placing my own leather folder on the table, which is why I brought documentation, just in case. Her eyes narrowed. I pulled out the first sheet, a transcript of a phone call with my stepfather. Louis, 6 months ago. I said, you two put a deposit on a house in Florida. Louis said you expected Grandpa to die soon, that the money would be yours. My mother paled, but Louis quickly interjected, that never happened. I met his eyes calmly. I recorded the call. Gasps from Vanessa and Drew, my siblings. I continued, here's the bank record of $30,000 wired to Mom for medical expenses. 3 days later, she posted pictures from a luxury resort with the caption, Birthday Bliss. My mother's jaw clenched. Here, I slid out another document, is the withdrawal Grandpa made to cover urgent dental work for Vanessa. Only she was in Cancun that week, posting cocktail selfies. The room fell into stunned silence. And this, I said, pulling out the final sheet, is a notarized letter Grandpa gave to his oldest friend, George Harmon, explaining exactly why he left the estate to me. He cited mismanagement, dishonesty, and a pattern of financial abuse. My mother stood abruptly. You manipulative little no, I said, voice low but steady. I'm done being quiet. You've all treated me like a placeholder until the real heirs could step in. But Grandpa made his choice. And it wasn't out of favoritism. It was out of necessity. The advisors were visibly uncomfortable now. One of them whispered something to my mother, but she waved him off. You think this proves anything, she spat? You think you're better than us, no? I replied, I think I'm different. And Grandpa saw that. Vanessa, to my surprise, spoke up. Is all of that real? Yes, I said, looking her in the eyes for the first time. And there's more bank statements, voicemails. I've documented everything. Drew shifted in his seat. So you came prepared. I came protected. I corrected because I knew this wasn't dinner. It was a setup. My mother crossed her arms. Then get out. I nodded, gathering my folder. Gladly. But just so you know, my attorney is parked a block away. If I don't return in 15 minutes, she calls the court. And if you try anything, threats, manipulation, forged documents, she'll press charges. The room cracked with tension. I turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. This meeting's over, and the next one, if there is one, will be in a courtroom, not around a dinner table dressed up like a trap. I stepped out into the cool evening air, each breath steadier than the last. Behind me, I could hear the sharp murmur of voices rising, blame shifting, control slipping from their hands. For once, it wasn't my silence that unsettled them, it was my clarity, and I had never felt stronger. I walked away from that dinner ambush with the last word, but the echo of my mother's fury trailed me all the way home. The next day, silence filled my phone like a storm waiting to break until it didn't. Instead, it cracked open in an entirely different way. Noah showed up at my apartment that evening. I hadn't seen him speak a full sentence in the weeks since the will was read. He'd been a silent bystander, floating in the orbit of our mother's influence, never questioning, never choosing. But now, standing in my doorway with a duffel bag and eyes that looked heavier than his 18 years. I saw something shift. "Can I stay here?" he asked. "Just for a little while?" I stepped aside without a word. The door closed behind him, and with it, something else opened the possibility of rebuilding what family was supposed to mean. We didn't talk about the confrontation right away. That night, I made him tea, cleared off the pull-out couch, and let him be. But the next morning, as we sat in quiet morning light, he finally broke the silence. "I didn't know," he said, voice low. "I didn't know how much she lied." I looked up from my mug. "You weren't supposed to." She made it all sound justified, that you were being selfish, that Grandpa was confused, that the money was for all of us. He paused, staring down at his hands. "But last night when you pulled out the records, the photos, it was like watching a curtain drop." I reached across the table, not to comfort but to steady him. "She manipulated you. Noah. The same way she tried to manipulate me. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest for facing it now." His eyes glistened. "She said if I walked out that door, I shouldn't bother coming back. That hurt me more than I wanted to admit. But I kept my voice level. She said the same thing to me. It doesn't make it true." That week, I let Noah settle in. We coexisted in a fragile new rhythm, me balancing estate responsibilities and business planning, him doing schoolwork at the kitchen counter, occasionally asking questions about the business Grandpa left behind. It was slow, quiet, healing. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope with no return address, tucked inside a small notebook. The handwriting on the front simply read, "In case they ever question you." It was from George Harmon, Grandpa's closest friend. We'd spoken briefly after the funeral, but he'd remained mostly distant, loyal to his own grief. Now, inside the envelope, I found a letter dated 3 months before Grandpa passed. In his careful cursive, he wrote, "Lana, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be cautious. I've seen your mother's desperation grow louder with every passing year. I love her, but I no longer trust her. I've chosen you not because of blood, but because of what I've seen: resilience, integrity, and restraint." Tears blurred the lines. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about stewardship. "You are the only one I believe will protect what I've built, not the money, but the values behind it." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my legal folder. Next to the will? Then I called George. "I got your letter," I said. "I knew the time would come." He replied, "Do you still have the journal he kept?" He paused. "Yes, locked in his safe. You should see it." Later that afternoon, I returned to Grandpa's study, the one no one in the family had dared enter since the funeral. I opened the safe using the combination only he and I knew: my birthday. Inside, nestled between property deeds and certificates, was a worn, leather-bound notebook. The entries were dated, orderly, and devastating. May 12th, Patricia asked for $15,000 today, claimed it was for Noah's school trip, saw her 2 days later wearing a new Rolex. June 9th, Vanessa insists she needs funds for dental work. Found out she's planning another Vegas weekend. August 3rd, this is the last time I loan her anything. She says it's for Jason's therapy. I know it's not. Every line was a nail in the coffin of my family's lies, but more than that, it was evidence painstakingly gathered by a man who had seen too much and still hoped he was wrong. I scanned every page and sent it to Samantha, my attorney. Her reply came swiftly. "This is gold. If they try anything, they don't stand a chance." That night, I told Noah everything: the letter, the journal, the years of quiet betrayal Grandpa had endured. He listened in stunned silence, then asked, "Why didn't he ever tell me?" "Because he wanted to protect you from the weight of it. He hoped you'd never have to know." Noah looked up, jaw clenched. "I want to help. With the business, with whatever comes next." I saw something fierce and familiar in his eyes. "Then you will," I said. "But only if you do it the way Grandpa would have wanted, honestly, patiently, and with both feet planted." He nodded slowly. "Deal?" The next morning, my phone buzzed with a new text from my mother. "Let's meet. One last time. No lawyers, no tricks, just family." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "Fine. But this time, I'm bringing the truth with me." I went to that final meeting with my mother, not expecting closure, but needing to draw the line myself. I brought the truth in my hands documents, letters, the journal, and walked out with something far more valuable: clarity. There would be no shared fantasy of reconciliation, no illusion that we could pretend none of this happened, but I could move forward, knowing who I was and what I stood for. That clarity followed me into the next chapter of my life, the one where grief gave way to purpose. I resigned from my job 2 weeks later. My position in marketing had always paid the bills, but it had never lit the fire in me that Grandpa's world did. He built something from nothing and left it in my care, not just as an heir, but as a steward. The hardware business wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with fancy titles or glossy conference rooms, but it had heart. And it had employees who'd worked under Grandpa for decades, who remembered him not as a CEO, but as a man who remembered their kids' birthdays and lent them money in quiet envelopes when times got tough. I started at the flagship store. The first day I walked in as the new owner. No one knew what to say. Some looked skeptical. Others whispered. A few avoided my eyes entirely. I didn't blame them. I was Harold Brooks's granddaughter, but to most of them, I was still the quiet girl who used to sit in the back office with cocoa and a calculator. So I listened. I asked questions. I learned names. I walked the floor and helped stock shelves. I asked about inventory flow, freight issues, customer retention. And slowly, the walls began to drop. When they saw I wasn't here to tear things down, but to build them up, the energy shifted. Noah, to my surprise, became part of that shift. He started tagging along after his classes, curious at first, then gradually invested. He took notes during meetings, shadowed store managers, and started reading Grandpa's old journals like textbooks. I saw flashes of something in him I'd never seen before: focus, confidence, direction. The same way Grandpa once nurtured that in me, I found myself doing it for him. "You don't have to prove anything," I told him one night after a long day at the store. "I'm not trying to prove anything," he said. "I just want to deserve the Brooks name." That's when I knew he was ready. We created a structured internship. Noah would rotate through each department over the next 2 years while finishing school, with the goal of stepping into a permanent leadership role post-graduation. He didn't want handouts. He wanted accountability. Grandpa would have loved that. But rebuilding the business wasn't just about operations. It was about honoring the legacy behind it. So I made 3 decisions. First, I established a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name specifically for students like Noah, who had potential but lacked the family support or financial means to pursue business education. I called it the Harold Brooks Foundation for Second Chances. Second, I created a restricted monthly stipend for my mother, not out of obligation, but out of choice. It was enough for her to live modestly, but with legal guardrails to prevent the kind of reckless spending that had haunted us all. I didn't do it to forgive her. I did it because Grandpa would have wanted me to protect her from herself, if possible. Third, I used a portion of the estate to launch a startup incubator focused on young entrepreneurs in underserved communities, especially women. Grandpa had always believed that business wasn't about greed, but about creating stability. This was my way of carrying that belief forward. It was during this time that Sophie reached out. I hadn't spoken to my older sister since the day I walked out of the family dinner showdown. She'd stayed silent then, neither defending me nor condemning me, just watching. But her message was simple: I'd like to talk. Just us. We met at a cafe near the park where we used to play as kids. She arrived alone. No designer sunglasses this time. No rehearsed indignation. Just her. "I owe you the truth," she said. She confessed what I had suspected, that she had always felt like Grandpa favored me. That she hated how I was the quiet one but somehow always got his attention. That she was jealous. But I see it now. She said, he wasn't playing favorites. He was investing in someone who showed up, even when no one asked her to. I said nothing at first. Then finally, I offered a quiet reply. I never wanted to take anything from anyone. I just wanted to be seen. She nodded. "And you were—" I just wasn't ready to accept it. We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic reconciliation, just two sisters trying to breathe in a space no longer filled with competition. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. "Can we try again?" she asked. "Maybe not as perfect siblings, but as people who want something better than what we grew up with." I nodded. "We can try." Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean opening all the doors again. It meant I could let go of carrying their shame on my back. I went home that evening and lit the lamp in Grandpa's old study. Noah was at the dining table sketching out a marketing idea for eco-friendly supply bundles. For the first time in months, the house felt like a place of motion, not mourning. We were building something together, not just out of brick and mortar, but out of second chances, restored trust, and a legacy finally rooted in truth. Sophie's quiet outreach had opened a small door back into something resembling family, and I had walked through it with caution, but it was the email from my mother that stopped me in my tracks. The subject line was just one word: truce. There was no long-winded explanation, no guilt, just an admission that anger hadn't changed anything. She'd heard from Sophie that the business was doing well, that Noah was thriving, that I hadn't collapsed under the weight of it all. She wanted to meet. No lawyers, no demands. Just talk. We met at a quiet restaurant. She looked older. Not in the tired, dramatic way people do when they want sympathy, but in a softer, more honest way. The armor of control she always wore seemed thinner now. She greeted me with a nod. No hug, no false warmth. "I've been seeing someone," she said. "A therapist." That surprised me more than anything else she could have led with. She stared into her glass as she spoke. "I've spent most of my life trying to buy proof that I mattered. I don't think I even knew what I was chasing. I didn't interrupt, I didn't offer comfort or ease. I just listened. It felt like enough." She asked about the foundation, about Noah. She even smiled faintly when I mentioned the new eco-friendly showroom and how his business pitch had sparked the idea. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Your grandfather would be proud of you, not because of the money or the way you fought us, but because you didn't let it ruin you." Her voice caught slightly. "That's what I did. I let it ruin me." It wasn't an apology. And not really, but it was a reckoning. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything in return. We parted without promises, just space, maybe for the first time in our lives. We had something that resembled respect. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the rhythm I had built managing the stores, mentoring Noah, expanding the foundation. Sophie started helping out at the shelter full-time, and Noah prepared for his final semester. The business was thriving. But more than that, so were we. 1 year after my grandfather's passing, we held a quiet memorial at the flagship store. We unveiled a plaque in his honor. There were no speeches, no fanfare, just gratitude. That night, I sat alone in the study that had once belonged to him. Now it was part office, part sanctuary. The same worn journal lay on the desk, opened to the final page. I traced the last thing he ever wrote to me. The true measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you do with it. Make it matter. There was a time I thought I needed to earn my place at the table. That silence meant weakness, that being overlooked meant I had to shout to be seen. But I know better now. I don't need applause to validate my choices. I don't need acceptance to justify my path. My worth was never in what they gave me. It was in what I refused to let them take. So I don't carry bitterness. I carry something far heavier and far more enduring self-respect. I stood, turned off the lamp, and closed the study door behind me. Quietly. Because some victories don't come with fireworks. They come with peace. And dignity once claimed doesn't need permission to remain.